Okay, so welcome to this special tutorial. As I had mentioned in the class, this is in preparation of the makeup quiz exam which we will be conducting tomorrow morning from 10:30 to 12:30. Please note that the quiz will be conducted in rooms LCH 11 and LCH 12. Are you familiar with those rooms? This is 32. Our regular classroom is 31. So just as you have 31, 32, you have 11 and 12 below this. So those are the two rooms which we got. We could not get these two rooms. So 11 and 12 is where the thing will be conducted. And this particular room, LCS 32, will be used by those people who were absent in the quiz completely. So those who are giving quiz for the first time, they will be attending it here. Okay. The portion for the quiz tomorrow is same as the portion for the original quiz. So some of you will remember that portion was the basic concepts in programming that we had discussed. These basic concepts include the innate data types, which are internal data types of C++. So what are those data types? Int, float and char. These are the three data types. There is a Boolean data type which we have not discussed. We will not bother about it right now. But how are these numbers represented? What are the operations on these numbers? How do you define variables? How locations are get allocated and so on. And more importantly, if there are expressions involving these variables, so x plus y minus z divided by something, etc., how are those expressions evaluated? If there is a mixture of integer and floating point, how does the conversion happen? If there is a char variable, then can it be converted into something else? These are some of the issues that we need to understand. The assignment operation is the one which allocates a value to a variable. So we will see the assignment statement very briefly. These are of course very preliminary things. The more important thing is, as we write instructions in our program, they are executed. And normally they are executed sequentially. So one after another. And that is what we call sequential execution. But we may want to conditionally execute some statements. We want to say if something is greater than this, then do this, otherwise do this. For that, there are instructions in C++ which are if else, if, and a special instruction called switch. So these are the instructions which permit us to specify in our program that execute this only if this condition is true, otherwise execute something else. Equally important is an extension of this decision making flow control, where not only we want to conditionally do this or do that, but we want to say iteratively do this. Keep on doing this again and again and again and again and again. And for example, if we want to add terms of a series, now if there are n terms, we are not going to write n instructions. We want to execute a simple body which will iterate n times and find out sum of n terms. Such iterative control is available in C++ through three specific instructions. One is called the while loop, the other is called the for loop, and the last one is called the do while. These are the three instructions for iterative execution. Having understood these and seen some of the examples which we will illustrate here, we then move on to a concept of handling elements of the same type. So suppose I have 2000 integer values, I have 500 floating point values, say marks, and I want to do some computations using those. Then how do I store those values? For that you have the notion of an array. Array is a collection of elements, so we will see how arrays are defined, how they are used. In particular, the iterative structures that we would have discussed are most important in handling arrays, because you don't handle arrays element by element, you handle arrays through a loop structure. More importantly, an array of characters is regarded in C++ as a string, like a name or whatever symbols that you want to give. So we will study how such strings are handled to store, let's say, names of people, to find out which character occurs where, to find out what is the composition of string, to copy one string from one array to another, to read names, etc., etc. These are the typical activities that you do with these strings. And finally, we have multidimensional arrays. We have taken one example of an image processing in the class. I may or may not discuss these multidimensional arrays depending upon how much time it takes. And if I get to discuss it, then I will include a question on that in the quiz. If I don't get to discuss it, then I will not have a question. Okay. So you need not worry from a perspective of the examination. Okay. So we start with the discussion on basic data types. So can you tell me what are the basic data types which C++ supports? Sorry? Int. So int stands for what? Integer values. How much of storage is occupied by one integer value? 4 bytes. Sometimes, normally 4 bytes, but sometimes it could be either 2 or even 8. The integers that you handle on Ubuntu using C++ are all 4-byte integers. Okay. If you write a short int, then it may become 2 bytes, and long int could be 8 bytes. And there is also a unsigned char, which is 1 byte, which is also treated as an integer. So strictly speaking, 1, 2 or 8 is the correct description. Ordinarily, however, it is 4 bytes. And the internal representation, again with which we don't have to do much, but we note that it is represented as a binary number, and it is usually in 2's complement form internally or a signed form, and the range is from minus 2 to the power 31 to plus 2 to the power 31 minus 1. That is the range in a 4-byte integer. Okay. Then there is a float data type. It has typically fractional values, and it also has large or small values. How many bytes does a float occupy? 4 bytes. Although optionally it can have 8 if you just say double. So double is 8 bytes, but we have been mostly using 4-byte floating point. Please note that these values are represented as a mantissa and exponent. Okay. So there are a few bits which go for mantissa and a few bits which go for exponent. Typically, although it is not necessarily standard, exponent occupies 8 bits and mantissa occupies 24 bits. I am saying typically this is internal representation. The point is that internal representation of floating point is completely different from integer, and that is why integer numbers and floating point numbers cannot be mixed or added as we would add ordinary numbers. Okay. Then there is a basic data type called char, which handles what? One symbol, one ASCII symbol. And this is always 1 byte. This is also equivalent to an int, because ASCII codes are between 0 to 255. So therefore, any character is treated internally by C++ as if it was an integer number. So you can actually assign a character value to an integer variable and the equivalent ASCII code value will get assigned there. So number, it is treated almost as a number. But when you use it as a character, it will display, for example, as a character, output as a character, etc. There is another data type called bool, which we will not bother about. The boolean, it stands for boolean. It has only two possible values, true or false, and that is used to store any decision that you might have made in your program earlier. But we are not bothering with that for the time being. Double is a version of float. So just as int has short or long. Long int means 8 bytes, short int means 2 bytes. Similarly, double is a version of float. Double means it is doubly wide float. So that float is 8 bytes. 8 bytes is how many bits? 64 bits. So what they do is in 64 bits, they extend the exponent instead of 8 bits to 12 or 16 bits. And all the remaining bits are used for mantissa. So the precision is much larger. If you have a 4 byte float, the precision is usually 6 to 7 decimal digits only, nothing more than that. Since most of the data types are arithmetic data types, the operations will also be arithmetic type. First, we consider the definition of variables. So how do we define integer variables, for example? We may say int m, comma n, comma p, comma this is one way of defining. So you write the keyword int followed by the names of the variables that you have. Each one gets allocated memory 4 bytes. Okay. Similarly, you can define floating point variables. How do I do that? What do I write? Float. And I could have, let's say, k, x, y, etc. Similarly, I can define character variables. So I can say char a, b, whatever. Int and float variables are given 4 bytes each. Char variable is given 1 byte each. Fine. The operations on these variables are typically of the type of arithmetic operations. So first we consider expression. So suppose these are the definitions which I have made earlier, and suppose I say P is equal to 5 plus 3 star m minus 16 star n. So can you tell me how this expression will be evaluated? This is an expression you all understand. What will be done first? First will be which multiplication? There are 2 multiplications. Okay. So you know the precedence order. What is higher precedence in arithmetic operations? Multiplication and division. Next order, addition, subtraction. And if there are operations at the same level, then those operations are carried out from left to right. So ordinarily this will be done first, some result will be obtained, then the expression changes, it now becomes 5 plus result minus 16 star n. Now 16 star n is higher priority, so this will be done next. Now the expression becomes 5 plus result 1 minus result 2, and then you add or subtract, you will get the final. What is important to note is that in the expression, when the variables are of the same type, then the result is also of the same type. For example, if I were to say m is equal to 7 by 3, what is the value of m? Why 2 and not 2 point something? Because m is integer? No, that is not the reason. It is because 7 is integer and 3 is integer. There is a difference between the two. Please note that on the left hand side, what is written, it does not matter. For example, suppose I had said x is equal to 7 by 3. So according to your logic, since x is floating point, 7 by 3 should translate into 2 point something something. That is not correct. When the expression is evaluated, C++ does not look at the left hand side at all of the assignment operation. Expression is first evaluated, independent of what it is assigned to. It may be assigned to anything in the world, but it doesn't matter. C++ looks only like a blinkered horse, which looks only at the street. It looks at expression. So what is this expression? X is equal to 7 by 3. Expression is 7 by 3. 7 is integer, 3 is integer. So the division that will be done will be integer division. The result will be not 2 point something something, but just 2. And then 2 will be assigned to the left hand side. In the case of m equal to 7 by 3, it will assign m equal to 2. In the case of x equal to 7 by 3, it will assign x equal to equivalent of 2.0. That means it will convert 2 into floating point and assign, but the expression evaluation is supreme. So again, remove this from your mind, that the calculations depend upon what is the left hand side type. It has nothing to do with it. Expression is the most important. Understood? Okay. If you have a mixed mode operation, for example, suppose I say y is equal to 5.26 multiplied by m divided by 7 plus 3.28 multiplied by n divided by 2.5. So this is an expression. M and n are integer, y is floating point. So can you tell me what will be done? How will this expression be evaluated? First it will do what? First it will do division m by 7. Why? How many division multiplication operators are there? 2 multiplications and 2 divisions. When the operators are at the same level of precedence, how is the expression evaluated? From left to right. On the left, what is the expression? 5.26 into m. So this will be evaluated first, because this is left to right. Now notice that when you evaluate this, m is integer, 5.26 is floating point. So what will happen? M will be converted to floating point, will be multiplied by 5.26, and the result will be floating point. After that, the floating point result will be divided by 7. Now, what is to be divided by is floating point. What dividend is integer. So what will happen? 7 will get converted first to floating point, and the result will be floating point. That is how this expression will work correctly. Suppose you had written m by 7 first, and then said multiply by this. Then what would have happened? M is integer, 7 is integer division would have resulted. You would have lost the fraction, the result would be integer. Now that when it is multiplied by 5.26, that integer will be converted to floating point. But already you have lost some fraction. So it is very, very important to remember this, that when you have a mixed mode operation, then expression first decides what is to be calculated. First, what is to be calculated next. Then when it decides it has to calculate this meaning there are two terms and some operation. Division, star, plus, minus, and there are two operands. So then it will examine whether operands are of the same type. If operands are of the same type, result will be of that type. If operands are of different type, integer will be converted to floating point, and then the result will be floating point. And this is applied piece by piece to the entire expression. After you have calculated the value of the entire expression, then you get one result value. It could be integer or floating point, you don't know what it is. That value is now assigned to the left hand side variable. So that is the time when the C++ compiler looks at y, not before that. It doesn't therefore matter what is y. Is it integer, character, float, doesn't matter. It doesn't look at y at all. Till it has calculated the entire expression. It has got one value now. Now it will say, okay, I got this value, I have this variable. Now if this variable is integer, value is integer, I assign. If variable is float, value is int, I convert into floating point. Say 13 hoga, 13.0, I will assign. If the variable is integer and the value is float, say I say n is equal to some value which is 7.35. So what will get assigned to n? If n is integer? Integer. So what it will do? It will not give any error. N is equal to 7.5 is a valid statement. Or 7.35. What it will do is, it will remove all the fractional part. It doesn't matter what is the fraction. 7.99 hoga to bhi, it will make it 7 only. So n will have a value 7. This is what is important. So please make sure that you understand these basic things. That whenever assignment is done, at that time C++ looks at the type of the left hand side variable, not till then. Okay, till then it is evaluating expression. And any long expression, even if it has 35 terms, so many additions, subtractions, brackets, this, that, ultimately it will give you one value. And that value will be either integer or float. Whatever is that value, that is now assigned to the left hand side. Is that clear? Okay. There is an operation called modulo. This is applied to integers only. So for example, 173 modulo 10. So what is the value? 173 modulo 10? Sorry? 3. So this will result in a value 3. So what it does essentially, it divides 173 by 10 and finds out the remainder. Okay. What will be 173 divided modulo 100? 73. What is 173 modulo 1000? 170. So you see, this is how you can extract things. Now this modulo operator is extremely useful if you want to determine individual digits of a number. For example, if I have a program wherein I have defined int n, and let us say I want to find out the first digit and the fourth digit of a 4-digit number. So suppose it's a 4-digit number. 4-digit number will be what? Not 0001 is not a 4-digit number. 0001 is 1. It's 1-digit number. So what is the smallest 4-digit number? 1000, 1000. What is the largest 4-digit number? 99. So suppose 4-digit number is given. And now you are asked, find the sum of first and the last digit. So if you have given n as 5174 and you want to find out the sum of the first and the last digit, then how much is that sum? First digit is 5, last digit is 4, sum should be 9. How will you find out in a program? Now finding out last digit is simple, modulo 10. So you say D1 is equal to n modulo 10. We will write a command, find last digit. Now how will you find the first digit, which I have designated by some variable, say D2? Sorry? Divide by 1000. Okay. What will happen when you divide by 1000? 5174 divided by 1000 ordinarily would have been 5.174. But since both are integer, it will be only 5. So, find first digit. And now, suppose you want to calculate, say, sum. I will define an additional variable called sum here and say sum is equal to D1 plus D. So, understood? This is very simple. So, let me give you a problem. Sorry, 1000 digit and tens digit. See, the digits in any number are counted as unit digit, tens digit, 100 place, 1000 place, 10,000 place, etc. So suppose the number given is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1000 digit is 2 and tens digit is 4. So sum should be 6. If the number given is 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 1000 digit is 9 and 10 digit is 2. So the sum should be 9 plus 2 equal to 11. Suppose somebody gives you a number 3, 4, 5. So what is the 1000 digit? Is 0, which is here, non-existent, plus 4, which is this digit, is equal to 4. Suppose somebody gives you only a single digit, 7, then 0, 0. Get the problem? It is important to first understand such problems. If you make a mistake in understanding, you will have a problem. Now, in the exam, sometimes I try to give an example like this, so that you will understand. But if example is not given, you should write an example. And you should write 2, 3 examples. कि ऐसा हुआ तो this will happen, if this is so, this will happen, this is so, this will happen. And then write your program. So how will you write your program? We will write our program in this space. So we will define int n, that is required. Anything else is required? Int, let's say d1, d2, and also I will require int sum, because I want to find out the sum. Now I start by saying C in n. Of course, normally you will say C out, please give the value of n, etc., etc. So this is the number given. Now the tens digit is very simple. How will you find? D1 is equal to n modulo 10. But now you do not know how many digits are there. So how will you find the thousands digit? N. Why the earlier trick will not work? N divided by 1000. Which digits? So suppose you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 divided by 1000. What will happen? How much? So you see, if the number is large, dividing by 1000 will not help, because you will get all the punchalla of all the earlier digits there as division by 1000. So what should you do? Yes, so divide by 10,000, you will get 12. Suppose the value was 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, you would have got 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, whatever is that number ends with the 1000 digit. So for that new number, if you get the last digit, you got the 1000 digit. So the correct thing will be n divided by 1000 modulo 10. Sorry? N modulo, so it should be what? So this is not correct. It should be n divided by 100. Because you see, I am not getting the units digit, I want the tens digit. Same logic will apply. Same logic will apply. If 10 digit, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the number, then if I say simply n modulo 10, n modulo 100, let us say, or n divided by 100, I will not get the tens digit. N divided by 10, I will not get the tens digit. I will get all the digits before that. So I first find out n divided by 100 and then take modulo 10. But what number will I get? N divided by 10 modulo 10. Apply this logic to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the number. What is n divided by 100? 1, 2, 3. The last digit is 100th place digit, not the 10th place digit. What we want is 4. not 3. So, it should be n divided by 100. It should be n divided by 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 divided by 10 will give you what? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 is the last digit of that n divided by 10. And when you take modulo of that, you will get the last digit. Is this clear to everybody? So these are simple tricks, but where we can make a mistake. Now, how did we correct ourselves? It was a mistake first, but somebody thought, and how did somebody think? That somebody actually calculated. Okay, if this is the value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what will happen? If I divide by 100, what will happen? If I divide by 10, what will happen? If I take modulo 10, what will happen? You should never answer a question without trying out one such value. And whether example is given or not, it doesn't matter. You should write an example. You should write an example of a larger number, smaller number, and see whether your program works correctly or not. Got it? So, while it is simple, but you can make a very simple mistake and you may get a 0. Whereas you actually understand what it is. But you are not able to correctly judge what should be right. And this mistake may happen anytime. Is that clear? So always construct a small example quickly. It will take 1 minute more, half a minute more, nothing more than that. So, can I consider that you have understood expression evaluation, use of modulo, conversion from integer to floating point to integer, etc., etc. Okay, no confusion there. Particularly 2 things to remember. Integer divided by integer gets you an integer and you lose fractional part. But floating point divided by integer is converted to floating. Similarly in assignment, floating point assigned to a floating point value, no problem. Floating point assigned to an integer value, no problem. X is equal to 10. 10 will become 10.0. But integer assigned to a floating point value, you will lose fraction. N is equal to 17.53, n will remain only 70 if the n is defined as integer. Fine? So no issue on that. Now we consider control flow in a program. When we write instructions one after another, they are executed in the sequence in which they are given. C++ permits us to combine all instructions written in one sequence and put them in a block. So everything put inside a block is considered equivalent of one instruction. For example, these are 3 instructions. Assume that they are all defined as integer. These 3 instructions are executed one after another. But suppose I want to combine them and treat them logically as if there was a single instruction. Then I can do that by writing an opening brace here and a closing curly bracket here. So whatever comes inside an opening curly bracket and closing curly bracket is logically considered as equivalent to one instruction. When program is executed, all these instructions will be executed. In fact, C++ says it doesn't matter what kind of instructions you put inside opening curly bracket and last curly bracket. There may be if then else, there may be conditional, there may be iteration, whatever. All of that is treated as one block and equivalent of one instruction. Therefore, whenever C++ permits you to write one instruction, and if you have to write more instead of one, you always put a block. Start, end. So all that is equivalent of logically one instruction. Is that clear? This is how the sequential instructions are executed. But sometimes I want to execute conditionally. Just to recall the flow chart, suppose I have a flow chart which says read x and y You understand this logic? I want to read two values x and y, compare which is greater, and whichever is greater I want to assign it to z. So after executing this, z should be the larger of the two. Now I can't write a sequential statement, so for that you have the if statement. In the if statement, you will write this as Is this clear to everybody? So what does the if statement do? It checks if x is greater than y. Only if that condition is true, it will execute that statement. If that condition is not true, it will execute the statement written after else. Okay? The logic for this is now this is very important to note that the if statement permits exactly one statement to be written after if and exactly one statement to be written after else. You can't write 20 statements that if x is greater than y, then do this, do this, do this, do this, else do that, do that, do that, do that. There is no direct method of writing such a thing in C++. You can write if x greater than y, do this, else do that. That's all. This and that, one statement only. That is why the format of description of if statement in C++ books you will find says if condition statement 1, else statement 2. But suppose you have to do many things. If x greater than y, do this, do this, do this, do this, else do that, do that, do that, do that. Then how will you write? Curly bracket, because of the C++ rules that whatever you write in a curly bracket pair is one statement. So you can write if you understood this? Sometimes if you miss curly bracket, there is a problem. Sometimes we deliberately don't write curly bracket because we have only one statement to execute. So please remember, if only one statement is to be executed, then you write it without curly bracket. But otherwise you must always write it. And as a result, I have been suggesting that a good programming practice is always to put curly bracket. Even if there is one statement, there is no harm. Because later on, if you suddenly remember, oh, if that condition is true, apart from this, I also have to do this and this, then I can insert it and it will not be a mistake because I will be putting that inside the curly bracket. Is that clear? Okay. What if I write only one statement? Let's say, what will this program do? It will read two values, m and n. If m is greater than n, then p is equal to m and output p. So suppose the values given are say 7 and 5. What will happen? What will be the output produced? P is equal to 7. So output will be 7. Suppose the value given is 2 and 9. Now what will happen? There is no question of no output. C++ is like a Rakshas or a jinn. उसको बोला output तो output देगा. This is very, very important to understand. Why you are saying no output first of all? Because you have not assigned any value to P. If M is 2 and N is 9, then you read M and N. If M greater than N, is it true? No. So P is equal to M will not be executed because that condition is not true. The next instruction says output P. Please remember that when you write this program, the compiler would have assigned locations, one for M, one for N, one for P, in some memory other thing. Now in this case, when M is 7 and N is 5, P will get a value assigned which is 7. But if M is 2, N is 9, P will not get assigned any value. How do we represent such values? We write a question mark inside, saying we don't know. It's very important to understand that we don't know. And when we don't know, C++ also does not know. So, suppose you are executing this program just now on a Ubuntu machine. There are memory locations, millions of memory locations, and when the program is compiled and loaded for execution, M, N and P have been assigned some locations. Each one of those locations contains some value from the past. We don't know what that value is. When you say C in M and N, the two values will come and replace whatever trash you had earlier. But P ko to kuch kiya nahi, you have not done anything to P. P will continue to have some trash value which will be printed. So, if P, for example, contains -17345, then what will it print? It will print -13745. Now, here is the curious possibility. Suppose this contains 9. Suppose this contains 9. What will it print? 9. Now what will you think? You once run a program with 7 and 5, it prints 7. Then you run a program with 2 and 9, it prints 9. You will think it is finding out the maximum. This should tell you that you should never test your program only with one data value or even with two data values, because such initialization mistakes will not be caught. If by freak accident, this is an accident. See, there are how many numbers possible? Exactly 9 to be there will be very unlucky for you. But suppose I am unlucky, then I would like to remove the element of luck by running it again with say 2 and 11. Now I have to be very, very unlucky if next time the location which is assigned contains 11. That is the reason why, apart from testing, you have to ensure that values are either initialized or assigned. No value should be printed which is a trash value. Is that clear? Of course, the correct thing would be to say if M greater than N, P equal to M, else P equal to N, if you want to find out the maximum. But there are occasions when you want to do something only if condition is true, not otherwise, in which case you are welcome to do that. What are the possible conditions that you can write? Greater than, less than, greater than equal to, less than equal to. Can I write equal to? No. If I want to compare whether m is equal to n, very important. If you don't write it, it will mean something else complete. And how do I say not equal to? How do I say not equal? Is this what I write? Exclamation mark. Okay. So please remember, these are basic comparison operators. Now when I compare, sometimes I want to write complex conditions. A greater than B and X less than Y. So how will I write that? I will say A greater than B Now, how do you know that it will not do B and Y, B and X? Because in comparison operators and logical operators, there is a priority. And logical operator and, or, etc. have a lower priority than this. However, it is always safer to write this in a bracket, write this in a bracket. This is the well-formed condition. And if you want to write an if statement, you have to preclude it by one more pair of brackets. Because if statement requires a bracket, and a bracket pair in which you write it. And then you write your statement. Is that okay? How do you write or? This is where you write two vertical bars. Okay. And you can also write not of a condition by preceding it with an exclamation mark. So and or not, these are the logical operators that you have. Apart from if then else, there is also a possibility of you are saying if, yeah, oh sorry, I thought somebody had a question. This is okay? If condition 1 what will be the meaning of this? If first condition is true, you execute S1. If the first condition is not true, then only you come down. Now you examine condition 2. If condition is true, then you execute S2. Else, when you come here, please note that both condition 1 must be not true and condition 2 also must be not true. Then only you will come here. And if this condition is also not true, then only you will execute S4. So S4 will be executed if condition 1 is not true and condition 2 is not true and condition 3 is not true. So depending upon how you want to write your logic, you can use this. This is called an if-else-if ladder. So instead of writing complicated if this, then if this, then if this, else this, else this, else this, you can use this ladder to compose your logic more correct. Is that okay? Fine. Suppose this is the problem you are given. Find the sum of the series 1 plus x square plus x cube plus something for some given value of x which is less than 1 by adding all those terms which are greater than 0.001. So suppose x is equal to 0.8. Now first term is 1 plus 0.8. Let me say, for example, then we have to add 1 plus 0.8 plus 0.8 square. How much will it be? 0.6 plus x cube. How much it will be? 0.5 0.64 into 0.8. So how much is it? This 524 or 512? When in doubt, do it the hard way. 64 multiplied by 8, 8 4s are 32, carry 3, 8 6 are 48, 48 plus 3, 51. This is decimal point, this is decimal point, so 1, 2, 3 decimal point, 0.512. How did somebody get 0.524? I am very curious. Andaj se. Please note the term. Term is x cube. So, etc. Anyway. Now, we know two things. The terms are indeed reducing. So, somewhere, some term will become less than 0.001. After that, I don't have to add. But I don't know how many terms I will have to add. I may have to add 200, 300, 574 terms. I don't know. But I have to keep adding till a term becomes less than something. Right? So how will I do that? That is where I need iterative thing. I know each term is x multiplied by the previous term. Okay. Each term is x multiplied by the previous term. First term is what? 1. So now if I start with 1 and then keep adding new terms to the sum and finding new term is equal to old term multiplied by x. If old term is 1, new term will be x. Next time, new term should become old term and this should be multiplied by x. So, if I say term is equal to term multiplied by x, every time I recalculate it, it will keep growing. This suggests to me that if I define float x term sum and I set up an iteration of this type, I start by saying C in, then I say term is equal to 1, or if you want 0.0, better way of writing it. Can you check whether this program will work? First of all, tell me whether you understand what this program will do. It is setting up an iteration. It says while term is greater than 0.001, keep on doing this. What am I doing? This means what? I do two things. One, whatever is the term which is greater than 001, I add it to sum. And I prepare the next term for the next iteration. So I multiply the present term by x. It will become term into x. That is the new term. And when I go back to the next iteration, that term will be examined. If you have any doubt, you should always write values of term and sum and find out what will happen. So let's execute this algorithm. Let us assume that C in as input is given 0.8. So I write term is 1, sum is 0 and x is 0.8. Agreed? The first three statements, C in x will get you x as 0.8, term is equal to 1 will get you term as 1, sum is equal to 0.0 will get you sum as 0.0. Fine? Now I come to while. While term greater than 0.001. Is term greater than 0.001? Of course, it is 1. So yes, therefore I go inside the loop. Inside the loop, what do? Sum is equal to sum plus term. So what will happen? Sum is 0, term is 1. This will be replaced by 1. Sum is equal to sum plus term. The next statement says term is equal to term into x. So what will happen to term? Term is 1, 1 into 0.8, so it will be 0.8. Now I come to closing curly bracket. Closing curly bracket means what? Iteration is over, go back and check the condition again. So I go back and check what condition? Is term greater than 0.001? It is. What is my term? 0.8. So I come inside the iteration again. This time what is the statement? Same statement is executed, which is sum is equal to sum plus term. So what is sum? 1, term 0.8. So what will be the sum? 1.8. Again term is recast, term is equal to term into x. So this will become how much? 0.64. And again I come to the closing curly bracket. I am thrown back again. Examine term. Term is 0.64 greater than 0.001. Come inside the iteration. Sum is equal to sum plus term. This time it will become how much? 1.2. And next is term is equal to term into x. So how much term will become? 0.512. We do it just only this much. But we now confirm, one, terms are getting correctly calculated and they are getting correctly added. So now let this iteration run. Let it calculate 1000 terms. I don't have to do Godagiri of 1000 additions myself. But program will work correct. Do you see how such iterations are to be set up? Okay. Suppose I want to set up an iteration which will add n terms, where n is given to you. Say n is 5000. Somebody says add 5000 terms. I don't care what is the last term. Add 5000 terms or add 250 terms. So if I have to do that, how will I set up the iteration? Let's go back to that slide. So what our friend is asking is, can I directly use the maths library which will find the exponential of x? What is the definition of e to the power x? Is it 1 plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? Is it 1 plus x plus x square plus x cube? ये नया exponential define कर दिया आपने. Anybody remembers what is the standard exponential definition? E to the power x, x raised to the nth term is typically x to the power n upon n factorial. Bappa, it's a completely different series. In fact, you will not come to write a program if standard functions are available, because for standard function there are tables available also, easy. Okay. And those, yes, you can use library functions in such cases. So cos theta, sin theta, e to the power x, log x, you can use the standard function. Many times what happens is that standard functions is not what you are interested in summing. Okay. That is why you have to use this. Second point, even if it was a standard function, okay, suppose I pose it as a programming problem. Standard function value will not fall from sky, no? Even for standard function somebody has to calculate. Now what you are saying is, some joker has done that work some 50 years ago, he has written something called library, let me use it. Very good. But tomorrow if you have to be that joker, whose work others will use, then you should be able to write that program. And that is what we are trying to learn in this course. Of course we would like to use others' programs, but we would like to learn to write programs ourselves. So now, just because he has suggested this, let us write a program to calculate e to the power x. But first, let me complete this part. We will come to that problem also, because that's an important issue. So, same series, 1 plus x square plus x raised to n, but I want to add n terms of the same series. There are two ways of doing this. First way, I do the same thing. I say float x term sum. Now I have to add n terms, so I will define an integer n. And now, since I have to do some counting, I will define a counting variable, say c. Now earlier what I did, I said c in input x. But I should also read one more value, n. How many terms I want to add? N may be 5,000, 15,000, whatever. Please note that this is a simplified version. I would ordinarily say C out, give value of n, then C in n, then C out, give value of x, then C in x, etc. But this is a simplified one. So suppose these values are read. Now I have to do exactly the same thing that I did earlier. That while loop is correct. But I have to add one more condition of counting. It is not, the condition is now not based on value of x. It is based on counting. So, I will of course start with term equal to 1, sum is equal to 0.0, but I will also say count is equal to 0. Let us say I start with count equal to. Now, I put my condition while count I want to add n times. My addition and term calculation is going to be same, but let me try to put this here. C is initially 0. Let's say n is 10. So 0 is less than 10. I will necessarily come inside. I will add the first term that I have calculated earlier. Sum is equal to sum plus term. And then I recalculated term is equal to term multiplied by x. Earlier I was checking whether term was greater than 0.001. Now term has no role in decision making. I am counting. So obviously once I do something, I should increase the count. Next time I do, again increase the count. So I should also say C is equal to C plus 1. Now let us see how it will execute. Let us assume n is equal to 3. I want to add 3 terms. Let us confirm whether this will add 3 terms or not. First time, C is 0, you come inside, what you are doing, sum is equal to sum plus term. You are adding the first term. Now you increase the term, C becomes now C plus 1, which is 1. Is 1 less than 3? Yes. You will again come inside. Now this time you will add 1 plus x, because term would have become x. Again C becomes 2. Is C greater than, less than 3? Yes. Again third time you come inside. Term is added, 1 plus x square. Term now becomes x cube. Okay. C becomes 3. You go back. Is 3 less than 3? No. So you will come out. So it is correctly adding. The point is, you want to do it 3 times. So you can count 0, 1, 2, or you can even count 5, 6, 7. From 5 you can start counting up to 7. But since n is given, the upper limit is known to you in terms of n. You can either start from 0 and count up to n minus 1, or you can start with 1 and count up to equal to n. So as long as it is less than equal to n, you can continue. So 1 to less than equal to n, or 0 to less than n, both are equal. Okay? Now the second way of writing this is, all of this will remain same. Same, same, same. Here I will simply say term is equal to 1, sum is equal to 0.0, and now I will say for everybody understands this? This is the for loop, counting loop. Note that there are 3 things specified in this loop. One is this, second is this, third is this. This is executed before you enter the loop only once. First time, before you come to the for statement itself, C equal to 0 is executed. This is exactly equivalent to doing it here. They are equivalent. C equal to 0 specifying here and writing C equal to 0 in a statement before you come to while is exactly. Next, you check C less than n, that is the while equivalent. While C less than n, do this. So the second part in the for is the condition. The third part is the increment part, which is executed at the end. So whatever you have written here, this is to be written here. So these are equivalent. Understood? This is very simple and a straightforward counting iteration. And in fact, when we use arrays, we extensively use this construct. But there can be many variations in this construct. For example, the simplest variation is, you rarely write C equal to C plus 1. What do you write instead? C plus plus. Not the C plus plus compiler, but variable C incremented by 1. Okay. Okay, so find out what is the value of k that will be printed. Okay, what's your answer? Everybody? Why? K has not been initialized. Instead, in this program, I have stupidly initialized I, which was not necessary, because the for statement was going to initialize I anyway. But K, which I am changing, is not initialized at all. Of course, can you say none of these always? Because of the bad luck factor. If that location for K contains 0, then you may get the right answer. But that is chance. By and large, none of these is the right answer. Now suppose I say K is equal to 0. Tell me what will be the answer? Now you have to do some work. Earlier was easy. So do it, find out what is the value of K. Execute it. How much will it be? 10. Pakka? Definite? Okay. Why? Tell me how you execute. The iteration is executed 5 times. And every time in that iteration, K is incremented twice. So, K plus plus, K plus plus. So, therefore, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay. If you have understood this counting, you have understood everything. Because that is how the iterations work. You have to find out how many times that iteration executes, and those many times the internal statements will be executed. You will be able to find out. Okay. There is another form of iteration which is not very often used, but it is also equally important, and that iteration is of the type do something 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 this statement actually has this something followed by something followed by something done first, then there is a condition check. And if the condition is true, you go back here. If the condition is false, you come out here. So what is the difference between this and the while? The while condition is checked before you enter the iteration. Here, the condition is checked at the end of the iteration. So usually do is used when for the first time you necessarily want to execute the body of the iteration. You don't want to check you first execute, then check. If that is your logic, use this. If you want to say first check, then execute and come back, then you use while. And for fixed number of times you want to execute, for. So these are the 3 possible choices, and once you understand the logic, you should be able to figure that. Okay. With this, we now move over to discuss arrays. When I declare something like this, what happens? "50 elements get allocated space." So A50 stands for equivalent of 50 variables all of type integer. Array has to be a collection of the same type. How is the first element identified of the array? And the last element is identified as? The important point is that C++ says that you can also write a j. Whenever you write j, it means whatever is the value of j, you are referring to that element. So if j is 5, you are referring to a5. J is 0, you are referring to a0. J is 49, you are referring to a49. J is 500, what are you referring? Error? Question, what will happen? What does C++ do? Sorry? Garbage value from where? See, garbage value is used in your program if the location that you have defined has not been initialized by you. Some old value will be there. But A500, some old value where? Earlier it was say n or x or something. So there was a location. What is A500? The location itself is not defined. So what will C++ do? No, it will not show an error. He is right, but he is not completely right. What C++ does, it is important to understand. C++ does not show an error. C++, unfortunately, while executing your program, does not do checking whether your index is within the range 0 to 49 or not. That is your responsibility. What it says, oh, you say A500, this is A0, this is A1, A2, A3, A49, A50, A51, A52, and go that corner, A500, somewhere here, some location. In this location, you might have a floating point variable z. Then it will pick up that value. Worse, this location may not be in your program. It may be his program. He is executing something and he has some n or something, okay, or some p or whatever. Now, if memory is not protected, your memory and his memory separately, for computer is all one memory. So, you will say Aj is equal to -5. And in his program, some variable will become -5. Is that okay? Maybe okay for you, but not for him. So that is why computer systems protect programs. And they say, this is your segment of memory, that is his segment of memory. And you cannot go into his segment of memory. So that is why you sometimes get a fault called segmentation fault. Segmentation error. Segmentation means you are exceeding, Baba, tera ghar hai, this is your house, that is his house. You are not permitted to eat in your house and go there to sleep. You have to stay in your house only. So segmentation fault. But if the index is exceeded by some small value, typically by one value, say it becomes, instead of 0, it becomes -1. Instead of 49, it becomes 50. Then invariably, you will still be within your segment. And it may create a problem. So your responsibility to ensure that the array index always remains between 0 and maximum limit -1. That is your responsibility. Understood? Never make this error. So particularly when you say j and such things, then you have a problem of this kind. Okay. Let us now consider this array, and my problem is put in values in successive elements of this array, which is 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. That means there is an array, you have declared an array. Now I want you to write a program which will put these values. 0th element it will put 5, next element it will put 10, next element it will put 15, etc. How will I write a program? Okay. So I have, let us say, this will go through all the elements. Please remember, for an array, if you want to scan all elements, or if you want to do something with every element, the simplest thing is to set up a loop for some variable equal to 0 to n minus 1. So j less than 50 means this loop will execute 50 times, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is fine. Now I have to say something like aj equal to how much? First time when it executes the iteration, what should be the value? J equal to 0. Yeah, but what should be the value of A0? 5. Next time it should be 10. So it is increasing every time. 5 multiplied by 1, 5 multiplied by 2, 5 multiplied by 3. 1, 2, 3, 4 is 1 greater than J, which is 0, 1, 2, 3. So suppose I said J plus 1 into 5. Will I get the correct value? Did you all think of this logic? No. That is the point. That is the way you have to think. That I want to get a series 5, 10, 15, 20. Then that series, what is the nth term or jth term? Jth term is j plus 1 into 5. Once you get the jth term, you assign it. So this is how you can manipulate arrays. Is that clear? Okay. You can also scan arrays. So how do you find the maximum element in an array? Just tell me whether this part of the program will read n elements in the array or not. I am reading the value of n and I am setting up a loop for I equal to 0 to n minus 1 input ai. There is only one problem. As a professional programmer, after reading n, but before setting up a for loop, I should check whether n is less than 5000 and n is greater than or equal to 0. If n is less than 0, no problem. The loop will not execute at all. Nothing will be read. But if n is 10,000, I will have a problem. Same segmentation fault. You are reading values and putting those values in his house. Not permitted. So that cross check you can do. But otherwise, programming wise, this will work. Now I have to find out the maximum of these n elements. It's a very simple thing. I can start with max is equal to arbitrarily the 0th element of the array, and then I can say for I equal to 1 to I less than n, I plus plus, if will this logic work? What we are doing is starting with max equal to 0 and then going through all the remaining elements 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if any one of those elements is greater than the current max, I replace max by that. So I found that. Okay. Now I will give you a slightly complicated example. Let's say this is the last example we discussed. Read this problem and understand and tell me what have you understood. Try to construct a small example. Given an integer array which contains integer values, print those values which occur more than once in the array. That means all values are not unique. So let us construct an example. Let us say the array is 1, 12, 5, minus 7, 12, 12, 5. So this is an array, it contains some integers. You will notice that 1 happens to be only once, 12 happens to be 3 times, 5 happens to be twice, and minus 7 happens only once. So now what is the problem? Problem says those values which occur more than once. So which are those values? 12, 12, 12 and 5, 5. So print those values, but print each value only once. How will you solve this? Sorry? So what he is saying is, take one value and examine whether that value occurs in my array, in my entire array. If it occurs once, then count will be 1. If it occurs more times, count will be more. And if the count is more, I will print it. So, suppose I follow this logic. Have you understood this logic? I will take each number separately. I will call it, say, element E. And I will see if E is there, there. Now somewhere it has to be there because I have picked up. But I will scan the entire array. If it has occurred only once, count will be 1. If it has occurred many times, count will be many more. So, I will assume that I have read n elements into the array, like we had done that just now. Now I start this. So I am looking at each element of the array in succession. I have to look at 0th element, then first, then second, then fourth. Whichever element I am looking at, I am assigning it temporarily to a variable called EL. So EL is the element which I want to examine. If you look at this array 1, 12, 5, minus 7, 12, 12, 5, I will be examining 1, then I will examine 12, then I will examine 5, then I will examine minus 7, 12, etc. Each one in turn. And what I am going to do examination means, take that element and check whether it exists anywhere in the array. So I want to, with respect to this element, I want to scan the entire array again. And wherever that any element is same as this, I want to increase the count. So I will set up another iteration which goes through the entire array once again. I will say now for j is equal to 0 to j less than n, j plus plus, if EL is equal to AJ, count plus plus, you see what I am doing? I have taken one EL. So for example, suppose I am somewhere 1, 12, 5, minus 7. Suppose I am at minus 7. My I is 0, 1, 2, 3. For I equal to 3, EL will be what? Minus 7, A of minus 3. Now with minus 7, I start scanning the entire array for j equal to 0 to 7. So I will check, is minus 7 equal to 1? Is minus 7 equal to 12? Is minus 7 equal to this? So if somewhere minus 7 will be equal to minus 7, count will become 1. Initially count was 0. Suppose I am examining 12, that is my I is equal to 1. When I is equal to 1, EL is how much? A1. A0 is 1, A1 is 12. So EL is equal to 12. Now with EL equal to 12, for example, for I equal to 1, EL will be 12. And I run this loop with EL equal to 12. Now what happens in the inner loop? J is equal to 0 to n, n minus 1. So all elements are checked against EL. Is EL equal to EJ? So is EL equal to A0? No. Is EL equal to A1? Yes. Count will become 1. Is EL equal to 5? No. Is EL equal to minus 7? No. Is EL equal to 12? Yes. Count will increase one more time. That means when I come out here, if count is 1, then that element has occurred only once. If count is more than 1, then that element has occurred many times. So, if count equal 1, then the element has occurred once, else right? Now I have got two portions of my program. Count is 1, it has occurred only once. If count is more than 1, it has occurred many times. I could simply say in my program here, if count greater than 1, see out EL, then I will print that. Print those values which occur more than once, my problem is solved. The second part of the problem is not easy. Print each such value only once. Imagine I start with 1, it will not be printed because 1 occurs only once. Then I come to 12, 12 occurs 3 times, my count will be 3, I will print 12. Then I go to 5. 5 occurs twice, 5 will also be printed. Then I come to minus 7, it will not be printed. But then I again come to 12, and with EL equal to 12, I go back to 0th element and again say, 12 is there, 12 is here, count is 3 again it will be printed. So 12 will be printed 3 times, 5 will be printed twice. I have solved this problem partially, not fully. Sorry? Come again? No, break where? If I break, I will come out and I will not examine any element after that. And suppose there are some other elements, I will not get them. So this is a hard problem. This is a hard problem. What you will have to do is, you will have to sort the array. You sort the array, ascending, descending order, whatever. Now you examine successive element, 0th element, first element. Are they same? No, they are different. They are different means that element is occurring only once. Forget that, go to the next, go to the next. But suppose you now find, oh, the next element is same. Now you stop there. You have found a fellow who is occurring many times. You print that fellow. But continue the checking. This fellow is same. Okay. Is this fellow also same? Is this fellow? Because when you sort, all the same elements will come together. Now if 12 occurs 3 times, it will come together 3 times. Then only some other number will come. When a next number comes, you forget this and start checking again. However, if the problem is only this, then you can do this here. If the problem is, it says, print those values which occur more than once. Fine, you are printing it 3 times, but that value is occurring more than once. So your answer is right. Suppose you have to print the values which occur only once. Then what will you do? Sorry? If count equal 1, see out that element EL, and that will happen only once, so that you have no worry about, you will never find it again. Suppose I said, you take the values which occur uniquely and find their sum. That means, in this given problem, I want to find the sum of 1 and minus 7. Because 1 is unique, minus 7 is unique. What can I do? First I define sum equal to 0 outside somewhere. Now I do the same logic. If count equal 1, sum is equal to sum plus EL, that element. Not see out here. I will complete that J loop, I will complete I loop, and afterwards I will say sum is equal to this. So it's easy, right? Everybody understood how you handle this? Okay. There could be any number of squiggles or complications that may arise out of this, but essentially, if you have understood the logic that you may have to scan the array elements one by one, you have to use a loop. For a given element, you may have to again scan that array or some other array, you have to put an inner loop. And you may have inner loop as many times as you want. The logic is that you should be careful about what is I, what is J, what is K, where you are using index, and the logic should be when you should do what. For example, printing that sum. You can't print the sum here. This is inside this I loop. So you close this I loop also, you find the sum, but print the sum outside, because you have to calculate the sum of all elements which are unique, no? So you have found out only one EL right now, you have added it to sum. When I changes, you will find some other element. All such elements will be combined only when you finish this. And here you should print that sum. Is that understood? Okay. I think we'll stop here.